Welcome to part 4 of the 2-player pinball machine build. In the last episode, I cut some of the holes for the tunnels and put on the final pieces of the main structure. Now that the box is complete, it's very sturdy and has little to no flex. Therefore, it's ready for the next step, which is to build the hidden tracks that connect the tunnels. I flipped it and used a couple of different levels to make sure it was sitting perfectly upside down. If it wasn't sitting level, the tunnels may not work properly, and it would be really unfortunate to have to go back and redo this. While building the tracks, I periodically checked to make sure it was still level. The vertical drop from tunnel entrance to exit was very small with little room for error. So, in order to make it work, I had to carve out sections so the marble would have the clearance on the underside of the playing surface. It was important not to rush the process of building the tracks because of how gradual some of the slopes would be. I was going back and forth as to whether or not to add an extra tunnel entrance, but I figured having more ways to cross to the other side would make the game more exciting. Go big or go home, right? I sketched out the location to the new tunnel entrance. It'll be just underneath the raised ramp that is another way for the pinballs to cross over. I cut out the holes when I was sure of the correct locations. The tunnel exits needed to be extended a bit. Now it was time to start the tunnel tracks. I started with the exits. The paths are wide enough to not pinch the marbles as they roll, but not so wide that if two marbles meet up, they won't get each other stuck. I put a piece of tape at the end of the exit ramp so the piece would not fall through when gluing. I also had to make sure there was enough room for the marbles to roll in between the new piece and the underside of the playing surface. The small clearance space is why I had to sand the channels. Because the machine is sitting upside down, whenever doing a roll test, the marbles have to go in the opposite direction than how they would normally go. That way, when the machine gets flipped, they'll roll downhill in the correct direction. So, when doing these tests with the machine upside down, they should be rolling from the exit towards the entrance. When it was ready, I glued it in place. A pencil became a useful tool to hold the piece at the right slope. This is in fact a two-sided machine, so anything I do on one side has to be replicated on the other side. The layout for both sides will be nearly identical, so neither player has an advantage. The first pieces of the tracks are in, but since they have a small gluing surface relative to the size of the piece, I let them sit for a while before moving on. I did a rough fit with the track pieces to see if this grand idea of the tunnels would work. So far so good. I decided to use a small block on the side to glue this piece of track in place. The block would sit parallel with the playing surface, and the track would be glued to that at an angle to create the desired slope. Naturally, I did the same thing to the other side. I connected this entrance and the exit with a single long piece of track. I discovered that there was not enough of clearance for the marbles to pass, so I had to sand down even more of the underside. I preemptively sanded the same spot on the other side. The long crossing tracks are done. Now it was time for the short, quick tracks. When cutting and placing these pieces, I made sure there was enough room to put a wall in between. I don't want any issues with the marbles getting stuck or falling out. With the tracks done, it was time to move on to the walls. I cut and placed pieces to fit snugly. It didn't have to look very pretty because it would be hidden, but it did have to be functional so the marbles wouldn't get stuck. Most of the walls are 3/8 inch plywood. A few select walls are 1/4 inch thick instead. I went through and added even more glue to all the seams. This would really help lock in all the pieces and prevent any unwanted movement. I let that sit for a few hours before moving it. I was really eager to test the tunnels, but I didn't want to mess anything up. Here, you can get a good look of how compact the underside is so far. There's still more work to be done under there, but already it's looking quite complicated. And now for the moment of truth. I did plenty of checks along the way to make sure it would work, but hey, you never know. It was quite a relief to see that all the tunnel elements worked as planned. I did a bunch of tests to make sure the marbles would always make it through. There's a few tweaks to do to improve it, but as of this point, it works great. This is definitely a unique element that I'm glad I decided to include. It sets this pinball machine apart from all others, and will make playing it even more fun and exciting. That's it for now. See ya.